Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Reading Time with EpicBayleaf. I just missed you guys so much. I decided I wanted to read one more chapter for you guys. So, without further ado, we are going to start on chapter 7. So, let's get started. The darkness pressed down on Gregor's eyes until he felt it had physical weight, like water. He'd never been completely without light before. At home, streetlights, car headlights, and the occasional flashing fire truck shone in the tiny window of his bedroom. Here, once he'd blown out the oil lamp, it was as if he'd lost the sense of sight entirely. He'd been tempted to relight the lamp. Meredith had told him that torches burned all night long in the corridor outside his room, and he could rekindle the flame there. Sorry about that. But he wanted to save the oil. He'd be lost without it once he got out of Regalia. Boots made a snuffling sound and pressed her back deeper into his side. His arm tightened around her. Servants had prepared separate beds for them, but Boots had climbed right in with Gregor. It hadn't been hard to get the Underlanders to excuse them for bed. Everyone could see Boots could barely keep her eyes open, and he must have looked pretty ragged himself. He wasn't. Adrenaline was pumping through him so fast he was afraid that people could hear his heart beating through the heavy curtains that shut off their bedroom from the hall. The last thing he could do was sleep. They had been invited to bathe again before bed. It was something of a necessity for Boots, who, in addition to stew, had conditioned her curls with some kind of pudding. Gregor hadn't objected either. The water gave him a quiet place to think out his escape plan. It also gave him a chance to ask Dulcet about the water system in the palace without seeming suspicious. How do you guys have hot and cold water running? Or hot and cold running water, he asked. She told him the water was pumped from a series of hot and cold springs. And then it just empties back into a spring, he asked innocently. Oh no, that would not be fresh, said Dulcet. The dirty water falls into the river beneath the palace and then flows to the waterway. It was just the information he needed. The river beneath the palace was their way out. Even better, it led to the waterway. He didn't know what that was exactly, but Vicus had mentioned it had 2 gateways to the overland. Boots stirred again in her sleep, and Gregor patted her side to quiet her. She had not seemed to miss home until bedtime. But she looked worried when he told her it was time to go to sleep. Mama, she asked. Lizzie? Was it only that morning that Lizzie had ridden off to camp on the bus? It seemed like 1,000 years ago. Home? Mama? Insisted Boots. Even though she was exhausted, he had a hard time getting her to sleep. Now he could tell by how restless she was that she was having vivid dreams. Probably full of giant cockroaches and bats, he thought. He had no way to tell how much time had passed. An hour? 2? But what little noise he'd been able to hear through the curtain had ceased. If he was going to do this thing, he needed to get started. Gregor gently disengaged himself from Boots and stood up. He fumbled in the dark and found the sling Dulcet had given him. Trying to position Boots inside it proved tricky. Finally, he just squeezed his eyes shut and let his other senses work. That was easier. He slid her in and slung the pack on his back. Boots murmured, Mama, and her head fell against his shoulder. I'm working on it, baby, he whispered back, and searched the table for the lamp. That was all he was taking. Boots, the pack, and the lamp. He'd need his hands for other things. Gregor groped his way to the curtain and pushed the edge aside. There was enough torchlight from the far hall for him to make out the passage was empty. The Underlanders had not bothered to post guards at his door now that they knew him better. They were making an effort to make him feel like a guest, and anyway, where would he go? Down the river, he thought grimly, wherever that leads. He crept along the halls, taking care to place each of his bare feet silently. Thankfully, Boots slept on. His plan would disintegrate if she woke up before he got out of the palace. Their bedroom was conveniently close to the bathroom, and Gregor followed his way to the watery sound. His plan was simple. The river ran under the palace. If he could make his way to the ground floor without losing the sound of water, he should find the place it drained into the river. If the plan was simple, its execution was not. It took Gregor several hours to weave his way down through the palace. The bathrooms were not always near the stairs, and he found himself having to backtrack so he wouldn't lose the sound of rushing water. Twice he had to duck into rooms, and hid where he spotted Underlanders. There weren't many about, but some of the guards patrolled the palace at night. Finally, the sound of water became stronger, and he made his way to the lowest level of the building. He followed his ears to where the roar was loudest and sneaked through a doorway. For a moment, Gregor almost abandoned his plan. While Dulcet had said river, he had pictured the rivers that flowed through New York City. But this Underland River looked like it's something out of an action-adventure movie. It wasn't terribly wide, but it ran with such speed that the surface was churned into white foam. He couldn't guess its depth, but it had enough power to carry large boulders by as if they were empty soda cans. No wonder the Underlanders didn't bother to post a guard on the dock. The river was more dangerous than any army they could assemble. But you must be able to travel on it. They have boats, thought Gregor, noticing half a dozen crafts tied up above the rush of the current. They were made out of some kind of skin stretched over a frame. They reminded him of the canoes at camp. Camp! Why couldn't he just be at camp like a normal kid? Trying not to think of the bobbing boulders, he lit his oil lamp from a torch by the dock. On reflection, he took the torch as well. Where he was going, light would be as important as air. He blew out the oil lamp to save fuel. He carefully climbed into one of the boats and checked it out. The torch slid into a holder clearly designed for it. How do you get this thing down the water, he wondered. 2 ropes held it aloft. They were attached to a metal wheel that was affixed to the dock. Well, here goes nothing, Gregor said, and gave the wheel a yank. It gave a loud creak, and the boat fell straight into the river, knocking Gregor on his rear end. The current swept up the boat like it was a dried leaf. Gregor grasped the sides and hung on as they shot into the darkness. Hearing voices, he managed to look back at the dock for a moment. 2 Underlanders were screaming something after him. The river curved, and they vanished from sight. Would they come after him? Of course they would come after him, but he had a head start. How far was it to the waterway? What was the waterway? And once he got there, where did he go next? Gregor would have been more concerned about these questions if he wasn't trying so hard to stay alive. Along with the boulders, he had to dodge the jagged black rocks that jutted out of the water. He found an oar laying along the bottom of the boat and used it to deflect the canoe off the rocks. The temperature of the Underland had felt comfortably cool since he arrived, especially after the 90-degree heat of his apartment. But the cold wind whipping off the water made goosebumps rise on his flesh. Gregor, he thought he heard someone call his name. Was it his imagination or... No, there it was again. The Underlanders must be closing in on him. The river swerved, and suddenly he could see a little better. A long cavern lined with crystal shimmered around him, reflecting back his torchlight. Gregor made out a glittering beach flanking one side of the river up ahead. A tunnel led from the beach into the dark. On impulse, Gregor pushed off a rock and pointed the canoe toward the beach. He paddled desperately with the oar for the shore. Staying on the river was no use. The Underlanders were breathing down his neck. Maybe he had time to pull up on the beach and hide in the tunnel. After they passed by, he could wait there for hours and try the river again. The canoe slammed into the beach. Gregor caught himself just before his face hit the boat bottom. Boots jerked partly awake and cried a little, but he soothed her back to sleep with his voice as he struggled to pull his craft across the sand with one hand while carrying the torch with the other. It's okay, Boots. Shh. Go back to sleep. Hi, Bat, she murmured, and her head popped back on his shoulder. Gregor heard his name in the distance and sped up. He had just reached the mouth of the tunnel when he ran headfirst into something warm and furry. Startled, he staggered back a few paces, dropping the torch. The something stepped out into the dim light. Gregor's knees turned to jelly, and he sunk slowly to the sand. The face of a monstrous rat broke into a smile. And that will finish chapter 7. So a little bit of a quicker read. Again, I wanted to apologize. I keep stumbling. I'm used to reading a little bit faster when you're not having to speak the words. I think maybe a majority of people might also do that as well. So sometimes I have to bring myself back because I'll read ahead a little bit. I don't know. It's kind of weird, I guess. But I want to apologize. So if I stumble, just something I'll get better at over time as I get used to reading aloud for these videos. So, well, thank you very much for partaking in that reading time with me. I will post chapter 8 here soon, hopefully, probably tomorrow or something. So you guys all have a great day. And if you like this video in any way, please like and subscribe, or even leave a comment, questions or feedback, whatever you guys feel is necessary. We are approaching the halfway part of the book a little bit. We got a couple chapters left. I think it looks like the 20 or 30 pages until we reach the halfway point. But so far, once again, it's one of my all-time favorite books, but I'm finding myself enjoying this again. And I'm finding myself remembering the entire series, because it's been probably 6 or 7 years since I last read probably the last book, the 5th book in the series. So it's been that much longer since I've read book 1. Anywho, you guys just stay tuned for more videos, and I love reading for you guys. So as long as you guys just keep on enjoying them, and I'll keep on reading. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for your time, and you all have a great night. All right, take care.